Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 198. As we are customary to do, we begin with the timely events of our period in the calendar. This week will be Yud Shevat on Friday, which is the 68th anniversary from the histalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe in Tafshin Yud in 1950. And immediately upon that, the sun sets and the sun rises. The ascent by the successor of the Frierdiker Rebbe, our Rebbe, the seventh generation, even though formally the Rebbe accepted the Nesius a year later in Tafshin Yud Aleph, but as soon as the Frierdiker Rebbe is histalkus by us, we count that. So 68 years from them, Chaim Shana. Chaim is the gematria of 68. So we will talk about that, as well as the corresponding chapter in Basi L'Gani that we study this year with the Rebbe's explanations that he said in both in Tafshin Chai and Tafshin Lamed Ches. So and Tafshin Mem Ches, Tafshin Chai and Lamed Ches, I'm sorry. Okay. So let's begin with the fact that it's 68 years. But before that, let's just begin with what is Yud Shevat exactly, for those that may not be familiar with it. Yud Shevat, as I said, is the day, and it was a Shabbos in 1950 in Tafshin Yud, Shabbos morning, when the Frierdiker Rebbe returned his neshama back to his maker. And with that began the next kufa, the seventh generation of the Rebbe, assuming the leadership of Chabad, Chassidus. At that time, the last maimer that was given out and published on that Shabbos, for that Shabbos, was Basi L'Gani. It's actually maimorim that were said by the Frierdiker Rebbe originally in Tafresh Pei Gimel, which would be the equivalent of 1923, but published 20 chapters of this discourse for maimorim, first for Yud Shevat, that Shabbos Yud Shevat, and then for the Yud Gimel Shvat, and then for Purim and for Beis Nissen. And these add up to 20 chapters. The Rebbe, when the Tafshin Yud Aleph, when next year, the first yahrzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe from Yud Shevat, the Rebbe said the Maimer Basi L'Gani and began explaining chapter 1, and then the next year would explain chapter 2. For us Chassidim, for all Jews, the significance of Yud Shevat in context of Chassidus Applied is very straightforward. Our Rebbe is the Shliach Hashem, the messenger from God, an ambassador, who comes down to this world to teach us how we should be serving and designating our lives, fulfilling our mission for which we were sent to this earth. So Rebbe is basically a man of God, who, like Moshe Rabbeinu in his time, guides, directs, and is mamshech, and transmits all the hamshachas, all the transmissions, and all the blessings necessary for us to fulfill our work. So just as Hashem appointed a Moshe Rabbeinu, then in each generation we have a Moshe. Ispashtusa de Moshe b'chol dor v'dor, anosi b'Yisrael, with all the qualities of an anosi. So in a sense, for us to be able to fully fulfill our calling, we all have a direct relationship with Hashem and God, but Hashem sends His avodim, His servants and shluchim, to this world to help serve as a role model and help us get beyond our own subjectivity and our own distractions, to really focus and crystallize what we are here for. So when it comes to Yud Shevat, it's not just another day, it's remembering that this is a day when a Nasi became a Nasi b'Yisrael, in this case the Rebbe, our Rebbe, son-in-law of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and continued the chain, which continues till this very day in the fulfillment of each one of our missions, respectively, whatever we may be doing. In this particular case, if I may add, Yud Shevat Tafshin Yud, which was 1950, began not just a new tkufa, a new period, a new stage in this work, but it began a new stage that's particularly apropos to our times, which is the times of freedom. Up till then, remember 1950 was 5 years after World War II. Up till that point, the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rabbi before him, and Jews in general in all the generations, all suffered and were under oppression, whether it was the former Soviet Union, whether it was the Nazi Europe, Yamach Shamam, whether before that the Tsarist Russia, and the pogroms and the inquisitions and the crusaders. So in 1950, when the Rebbe became Rebbe, 68 years ago, essentially began a new period in time for the Jewish nation, for the first time that we would experience such freedoms, that we can literally right now not be concerned about anyone coming to arrest us, thank God, or God forbid, I should say, the arrest, but thank God that we have these blessings. We have the ability to be as Jewish and as connected to God as we wish, and the only challenge is really the apathy within. And in a way you can say that Rebbe's leadership was the war against apathy. I've mentioned this a number of times. Trying to apply, Chassidus Applied, apply the Yud Shevat to our particular time. And it gives us the strength that with all our comforts, and not to take for granted the blessings we have, to know that we are charged with the mission to bring the Geula, which is the central theme of Basi L'Gani, the seventh generation, like Moshe Rabbeinu, the seventh generation from the time of Avram Avinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu, as he brings there the Medrash, Avram began to reverse the process of the concealment of the divine in existence by drawing down the divine from the seventh heaven to the sixth heaven. And Moshe concluded the process with the receiving of the Torah after they left Egypt, and then the building of the Mishkan, which is V'shachanti b'seichem Basi L'Gani Kalo, which is the theme of the Maimer, the discourse I just mentioned, that this was the garden, the place where God originally was there, but was concealed due to human sins. And Moshe Rabbeinu, after the 6 generations before him, brings it down, V'shachanti b'seichem, that God rests among us in this world, which is the theme of the 20 chapters of Basi L'Gani. And the Rebbe pointed out that year in Tafshin Yud Aleph, 67 years ago, Yud Shevat, that we too are the 7th generation from the Alter Rebbe, Der Hashvi, Kol Hashvi and Chavivin, the 7th generation, and we too are charged in this time to bring down the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, the 3rd temple, with the Geula Amitis Vashlema, in the same fashion of making it a permanent presence, that this world become a home for the divine. Which again, as I said, is the theme of this Hemshech. So what it means practically for us, that as it comes this Friday, this Yud Shevat, and we honor this special day, we reconnect and we intensify our commitment to that mission, the mission of making V'shachanti b'seichem, the mission of bringing the Geula, bringing the redemption. How do we do that? As we'll discuss in a few minutes in the theme of this year's chapter, but in general we do that through our commitment, not to our own selfish needs and not to our materialistic gains, but to dedicate our lives to transform every part of our corner of our world, our material world, toward the divine. When each one of us does that, we are essentially revealing the Mashiach within our own lives, within our own little corner of the world. And when that accumulates, you have the Geula. As the Rebbe pointed out, we already have thousands of years of all the billions of good deeds that were done, and the world has become far more refined than it ever was. So now we are committed and dedicated, as Yud Shevat comes, to add a whole new dimension called Chayim, being that it's Chayim. Chayim has a particular focus on that, called doing it with a new type of life, a new type of vitality. It was the year Tafresh Shin Mem Ches, 30 years ago, when the Rebbe spoke about Chaim as well, and there he spoke about the 68 years from the Frierdiker Rebbe's Nesias, Tafresh Pei. So the Frierdiker Rebbe's Nesias lasted 30 years. So 30 years ago would have been 68 years from the Frierdiker Rebbe began his leadership in the year Tafresh Pei, which is the equivalent of 1920. So in Tafresh Mem Ches, in the Sicha Beis Nissen of that year, the Rebbe spoke about the significance of Chaim and added that based on what the Rebbe has spoken a number of times, that the Frierdiker Rebbe's leadership was for 30 years, which is 3 periods, 10 years basically essentially in Russia, in the former Soviet Union. The next 10 years was mostly in Poland and in Europe. And the final 10 years, Tafshin till Tafshin Yud, was in the United States. That you can say, he says, that Chaim is made up of 4 letters, Ches, Yud, Yud, Mem, adding up to 68. That the Yud and the Yud correspond to the 20 years that was before he came to America, the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the next 48 years was from Tafshin Yud, Tafshin to Tafshin is another 10 years of the Frierdiker Rebbe till the Histalkus. That would make it into 30 years, and then we're left with 38, and then Tafshin Mem Ches would be another 38 years from that. So and the Rebbe speaks about it, different hints, that the word Mem Ches is also Gematria Chayil, and Chayil is Ches Yud Lamed, is Lamed Ches Mem Ches, right? Mem Ches, I'm talking about the 48 years, not the 68. 48 minus the 20. And it's also, Mem Ches, 48 is twice Kad, 24. Besamti Kodkud, which is a central theme of Chassidus, the idea of bringing together two different forms of a service. One comes from above down and the bottom up. And the Rebbe describes that briefly in that Sikha Beis Nisan Tov Shem Mem Ches. So whatever the Rebbe said 30 years ago obviously applies also to the 68 years from Tov Shin Yud, from what we're honoring now this week, and the same idea of the spirit of Chaim and all the interpretations within it. But the bottom line, practically speaking, it means a reinvigorated and re-intensification of our commitment to this mission, but now infused with the Chaim dimension, which means with a new vitality, new life force, new energy, and so on. Now, as far as the 8th chapter, so let me explain that. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, as I said, the Maimer consists of 20 chapters, and the Rebbe, no one knew that's what the Rebbe would be doing. But then what happened was that every year the Rebbe would explain one chapter, subsequent chapter. So in Tafshin Yud Aleph in 1951 he explained chapter 1, 1952 Yud Shevat he explained chapter 2, and number 53 chapter 3, and so on. Everybody wondered what would happen after 1970, which finished the 20th chapter of the discourse. So the next year, the Rebbe began again chapter 1, a second cycle. So we have, for many of the chapters, we have actually at least two discourses, sometimes more, because if Yud Shevat was on a Shabbos, often the Rebbe would repeat with additions and with changes the same Maimer, Mitzvah Shabbos, and if I bring in Yud Shevat on Saturday night, Mitzvah Shabbos after Shabbos. So when it comes to this chapter 8, we have from the Rebbe several Maimorim. That year, Tavshin Chai, which would have been Tavshin Yud Ches, would have been when the Rebbe first time explained that chapter, and that was also a Shabbos, Yud Shevat. So there was a Fabring Shabbos, and there was a Fabring Mitzvah Shabbos. Both of them, the Rebbe said, the Maimer Basi L'Gani, we have that. And then we have 20 years later, the second cycle, Tavshin Yud Ches would be Chav Ches Lamed Ches, Tavshin Lamed Ches, actually the year that is now we honor being 40 years from when the Rebbe had the heart attack. That year, Yud Shevat, the Rebbe spoke again on chapter 8. And some of it, a little more details in the subsequent Maimorim and discourses. What is the theme of chapter 8? So first let's talk about the general theme I mentioned briefly, is the idea of bringing the Shekhinah, the divine presence, back to earth, meaning revealing it, that this world becomes a mishkan, a dwelling place, a sanctuary for the divine, a material world. So the theme of the whole Hemshech, the whole discourse of Basi L'Gani, is that idea of how the process and what does the process consist of doing that. And he goes into the details of the Mishkan itself. The Mishkan is the temple, the portable, the sanctuary that they traveled with when they were in the wilderness, which later would become the temple that was established permanently in Yerushalayim, and when Mashiach comes will be the final permanent one that will never be destroyed again. So that these details of the Mishkan all indicate to us what our mission is. And he goes through first the Atzei Shittim. Atzei Shittim is the wood, which is called Shittim, and he explains how we transform the foolishness of material life into a foolishness, essentially, of a super-rational type of foolishness, which is beyond logic. In other words, beneath logic is transformed to something which is beyond the rational and higher than the rational. And then he goes into Vasisa Kroshim. Kroshim were the beams that held up the walls in the Mishkan, and analyzes in detail the letter Keresh. Keresh is made up of 3 letters, Kuf, Reish, Shin, and it discusses in this discourse, in the several chapters before chapter 8, which we'll be coming to in a moment, the letters Kuf, Reish, and Shin. And then saying that Kuf and Reish are both considered negative letters. It means Asvan de Bishin, which means letters that indicate a negative energy. And their alter egos, the positive is Kuf and Reish, is Reish Daled and Hey. Kuf is like a Hey. If you look at a Kuf, you'll see it consists of 3 legs, but the third leg goes down below the line and is not even with the right leg. And the Hey, you have also 3 legs, but the left leg is even with the right leg. So that's what a Hey is. What's the corresponding to a Dalet? A Dalet is a Reish. A Reish looks like a Dalet, but a Dalet has a little dot, a Yud, on the top of the Dalet that goes to the right of the Dalet. And he discusses in the previous chapter what's the difference between Reish and Dalet. Reish is again in the negative energy, Dalet is in Kedusha. It has the bittul of that dot on the other side, on the top of the Dalet, which is the Dalet looks like a roof and a right leg, and the bottom, and on top there's this dot. And then he continues in this chapter talking about the kuf and the hey. How the kuf is again a negative energy and the hey is a positive one. And what does he say? Briefly, that essentially the hey comes from the gimel dalet, which is from Kedusha comes gimel dalet hey. Gimel means transmitting, gimel dalim, to transmit to the impoverished. And that leads to a hey. What is the hey? The hey consists of 3 legs, 3 lines. There's a right leg, there's a top, and there's a left leg with a small space between the right leg, between the top and the right leg that are connected. The hey, these 3 legs represent thought, speech, and action. And what is that in Kedusha, in holiness? It means when a person's thought, speech, and action, which are the only 3 ways we can express ourselves in this world. We have faculties, as he explains in Tanya, but we have levushim, garments. 3 ways. Thought you express to yourself, speech you express to another, and action is something that you create outside of yourself. 3 ways we can express whatever it is we want to express. What is a hey? What a hey means is permeated with Kedusha. That all these 3 things, thought, speech, and action, are dedicated not to selfish gains and not to selfish purposes, but all dedicated, your thoughts are dedicated to something pure. Your speech is not about foolishness or nonsense or negative language about others and so on, slander, lashon hara. And action, that your actions, your work in this material world is all dedicated l'shem shamayim. And that's the hey. And that's why the hey has a leg on the left. I'm sorry, on the left, right, the left leg, because that's a leg. The yud, the daled, the yud is at the bottom, is only a dot on top, on the back of the roof of the daled. The hey, it's in front because it's a yichud ponim b'ponim, which means it's the full-blown connection that we take our thought, speech, and action and dedicate it to the divine. What is a kuf? A kuf also has thought, speech, and action. But the action, you see, goes lower the line. What in Chassidus, that indicates on something that's going in the wrong place. So he explains that kuf, which is, like I said, the alter ego, the antithesis to the hey, you also have thought, speech, and action, but the thought, speech, and action is dedicated to negative things. When a person thinks improper thoughts, speaks improper language, and speaks in an improper way, and that will lead then to actions that will be inappropriate. Like he explains that Rebbe reik, that's an empty pit. Reik is also reish and kuf. So the kuf indicates exact opposite of the hey. Now, of course, in practical lessons, as the Rebbe explains it at length in the Maimorim that I mentioned, Tafshin Chai and Tafshin Lamed Ches, here's not the place to go through all the details of the Maimorim. We simply don't have the time. But briefly, as he explains it, it comes down to, in applied Chassidus language, it means essentially that the way we build Keresh, which is the kroshim of the Mishkan in the physical were the beams, so we also have building the beams of our own temple by transforming the kuf into a hey. That's the whole purpose. Just like he said, transforming the shtus the klipa to shtus the kedusha, which is atzei shittim, the kroshim which are made from the atzei shittim, are essentially transforming thought, speech, and action. All of us have our thoughts and our speech and action, and we can use it in many different directions. So the way we build the temple through ourselves, becoming a channel of divine expression, is by taking our thought, speech, and action, which can go toward the kuf direction, negative thoughts and negative speech, which will lead to a negative action, doing things that are below the line, is crossing the lines that we shouldn't be crossing, that we transform that into a hey, where all 3 are dedicated. The thought and speech is holy, therefore the leg also doesn't go where it shouldn't be going. It stays in a place where the action is driven by and guided by the thought and speech that are driven toward the positive direction. Essentially, if you're thinking of it in terms of personal growth and applying it to our personal lives, I mean, this is a very direct lesson to each one of us because our challenges always lie in this area. We all have many temptations. There are things we can't always control, as he explains in Tanya, but we can control our thought, speech, and action. So simply put, comes Yud Shevat. What we have here is a new type of energy, new strength to renew in a Chaim, in a life, filled with vitality and dynamic way, our control over our thought, speech, and action. And it takes work, but it takes paying attention. So I think on a day like this, not just for one day, but this day gives us strength for the entire year. And as I said, in the Chassidus Applied way is a simple lesson for each one of us, how we direct these three forces of ourselves and recognize that our thought, speech, and action are three garments that are in our control. Like a garment. What's a garment? A garment, you can dress yourself in a garment, you can take off a garment. You cannot change your faculties, as he explains in Tanya, but you can control how you're going to dress. In this case, how you're going to dress your faculties, where will they manifest? Where will your thoughts be dedicated? Where will your speech be dedicated? Where will your actions be dedicated? Now, of course, you'll say, well, I can't control it completely. The point here is to try anything you can, even once a day, when in the morning you wake up or any other time, to focus and say, you know what, I'm going to direct my thought into learning something, and my speech into talking good about someone, making a good plan that will help others. And action, of course, acting that way at work and things that you do in action, including acts of charity and kindness, excuse me, that is the way we begin. And the more you do that, obviously, the more powerful it is. And being that we are these midgets that stand on the shoulders of giants, we have all the thought, speech, and actions, the positive, the millions, if not billions, that come before us. So when we do our small thought and our small speech, words, and our small action, as the Rambam says, we can tip the entire scale to tshuva, tzola, and bring personal and global redemption, which is, of course, the theme of Basi L'Gani, returning the divine presence in the garden as it was always meant to be, through us building from our personal lives, using our garments, from our keresh, our kuf and reish, turning it into a kuf, into a machshava dibra maisa that's directed toward where it should be directed. It's a basic lesson, but it still needs to be mentioned. As many times as we learn these ideas, it's always good to mention it in practical terms. Since it's also Parshas Beshalach, I'll just say one thought about that. There are many, many ideas that the Rebbe brings, especially in context of Yud Shevat. Yud Shevat happened in Parshas Boy, but it goes like this year, it comes right into Parshas Beshalach. So Parshas Beshalach, of course, is the first chapter after the Eden leave Egypt, the Golus, and they're now marching toward Kriyas Yamsuf, the parting of the sea, which will then lead them to Har Sinai, to Mount Sinai. So in Parshas Beshalach, we also call Shabbos Shira. It's a Shabbos of song, Shiras Hayam, Oz Yasher Mesha Bnei Yisrael, the song of Mesha with the Bnei Yisrael, and then Miriam with the women of Israel. Song reflects gaguyim, yearning. So yearning is, of course, something that is distinctly human and distinctly divine in a way, because no matter what our situation is, we know to yearn, to have a type of pining for something greater. When the Eden left Mitzrayim, Mitzarim v'Gvulim means their limitations, their boundaries, their inhibitions, and all the things that constrained them. We too have the same message today. We're leaving our constraints. And that is essentially the idea that led to, as I said, Matan Torah, and ultimately to the building of the Mishkan. So Parshas Beshalach is a preparatory stage that prepares us to do that. Now, when you sing a song, you're reaching a deeper part of your soul. The connection of song, of course, to the parting of the sea is because the sea, the song of the sea, because the sea represents in Chassidus the hidden worlds, land represents the revealed worlds, and when the sea parted, Hafach Yom the Yabasha, parted into dry land, it symbolized the idea that we bridge the two worlds, the hidden world that emerges through song, to be expressed, to express the inexpressible. And this is also what we do when we build the Mishkan. That the world is filled with powerful divine energy, but it's concealed. That's what Chassidus teaches us. The sparks of the divine are concealed. When we focus our thought, speech, and action properly, we're revealing that which is concealed, which is the divine presence, and we're turning it into a real, viable reality. To give strength to be able to do that, there was once a parting of the sea, which also parted all the seas around the world, to show us that we can actually access the superconscious and bring it into our conscious lives. That's the Aved of it. So therefore, once you have that, you can go to Mount Sinai, And you could have the Bitla Hagzeda, with the schism and the decree that separated the heavens from earth, and spirituality from the physical. Till that point, you could not transform a physical object into a divine force. Matter and energy were two different worlds. So the true E equals MC squared happened at Sinai. And where did it get consummated? In the building of the temple. So you have these stages, the exodus from Egypt, the parting of the sea, Mount Sinai, leading into the building of the temple. There it's consummated that what they took Vayikhu, Litruma, they took donations of gold, Kesef, Zov, and Necheshes, gold, silver, gold, and copper. And all the other 13, 15 material objects, Materialism on its own is a symbol of self-absorption, selfishness, like the kuf, like the reish. And what do? We turn that into a mishkan, taking gold, silver, copper, and all the other material objects, not spiritual objects, and turn that into a temple. So Beshalach is a stage, a critical stage in getting to that place. And the lesson, of course, is clear what we need to be doing in transforming our material lives into temples, into personal, microcosmic temples in our own personal lives. And then that all accumulates into having the Beis HaMikdash Ashlishi, the Deir Ashvi, bringing the V'shachanti B'seicham, the divine presence, permanently, forever, Adira B'tachtenim, with this material world, will be a home, a comfortable home for the divine. So we won't destroy the material world, God forbid. We won't annihilate it. We will actually transform it, that it becomes what it was always meant to be, a receptacle, a channel for divine energy. Okay. With that, let us continue on. I get a little more lengthy, but since it's Yud Shevat, we'll talk about several subjects, several questions. I just want to now reiterate again about encouraging everybody to participate in the 4th annual MyLife Chassidus Applied essay contest. This year we've added a track also for students. So the first prize is a $10,000 prize, second prize $3,600, third $1,000 prize, and a fourth prize that will be given only to students 14 to 21. They're also eligible for the other 3 prizes, but this one is only for students to encourage them that they shall also be able to participate and feel that they can win, is this fourth $500 prize specifically for students. As you look in the details that are being publicized, you'll also see we're going to create a lottery for the students out in Israel, that they can also additionally have a ticket, a free ticket to come to the Rebbe in New York at any point in the year. So, and more news to come, but I want to encourage everyone and make sure you know, again and again I emphasize this, that this is really a level playing field. Anybody can win. If you look at the winners of the last 3 years, then they're all available to be seen at meaningfullife.com/contest. You could see previous year's winners. Watch the video that we just released a few days ago, that the winners of previous years speaking. It's extremely inspiring. You'll see the diversity, the people from all backgrounds, and just it's amazing to just see the investment that they've made and the topics they've covered. So I want to encourage everybody to participate in this year's contest. And everybody, from my point of view, is a winner. I believe from Chassidus' point of view is a winner, because the mere fact that we make an attempt to take an idea in Chassidus, as we've been doing here this week, every week we do this in MyLife Chassidus Applied, and applying it to a contemporary issue or challenge in life, that speaks for itself what kind of power that has. But additionally, we wanted the incentives are obviously there for these cash prizes, and maybe be merry merit just from the effort itself, and especially as we come to Yud Shevat, which is, as I mentioned, Tovshin Tezvov, which would be 1954, the end of 1954, the Rebbe encouraged students to actually write essays printed in the Igris Kodesh, and I mentioned this a number of times as well. So there you have an additional incentive to give the Rebbe nachas, and what better way to do is taking the Chassidus that the Rabbeim gave their lives for, dedicated their lives, taking those ideas and doing what the Alter Rebbe says in the introduction of Tanya, applying it to the issues that we face. As he says, all the answers are there in Tanya. Okay, and Tanya, of course, extends to the rest of Chassidus. So let's go now to some questions that are specific questions. The first question we'll talk about is horoscope. What is the Jewish perspective on astrology and the zodiac. Does Chassidus Rebbe have anything to say about this? Thank you. I really enjoy your videos and have learned a lot. Okay, good question. I discussed this once before in episode 150. So here's a good opportunity to point out that we have a very powerful landing page about MyLife Chassidus Applied. You go to meaningfullife.com/MyLife, and there you'll find, firstly, the archives of all previous episodes. They're time-stamped, so you can find exactly the topic you're looking for when you go to the YouTube. There's also there all the discussions of the essays that were submitted in previous years are published there. Additionally, you'll also find ability to a forum to present and to post your comment or question or feedback completely anonymously, all there at meaningfullife.com/contest. So the cross-referencing I do is because there are obviously topics we've already addressed. I've addressed this topic in episode 150. But yet, because I've recently found a letter from the Rebbe on the topic, let me add to what I said then, but I believe it's similar to what was said back in episode 150. Here's a letter from the Rebbe written to someone in Chicago, the year of Tafshin, the 3rd of Nisan, Tafshin Chav Zayin, 5727, equivalent would be 1967. The Rebbe writes, blessing and greeting, and I duly received your letter in which you ask about the Jewish attitude to horoscopes, etc. Generally, astrology and the like play no part in Jewish life. As it is also written in the Holy Scriptures, of the signs in heaven, you shall have no fear. Jeremiah 10:2. On the contrary, we have the commandment, thou shalt be wholehearted with God your God, in Deuteronomy 18:13, which is also quoted in Shulchan Aruch Yoreh Deah, section 179. This means that the Jew has to have complete and wholehearted faith in God and in His benevolent providence, which extends to each and every one individually. As for taking an interest in horoscope, etc., purely as a curiosity and the like, as you mentioned, this would amount to a waste of interest, which should be channeled in a more productive way. For it is explained in Chassidus that God has not given man in excess of capacities, nor a deficiency of it. In other words, every person, and especially a Jew, has been given a certain amount of capacities and powers of concentration, all of which must be utilized in the fulfillment of his purpose in life on this earth, namely to live in accordance with the Torah and mitzvahs and to disseminate justice and righteousness, etc. It follows from the above that if a person should divert any of his capacities, thoughts, and concentration on a useless thing, even if it be harmless, it is nevertheless harmful in the sense that he would thereby create a deficiency in the area which is important and necessary for him to do. The above is even more important in the case of a Jewish woman and housewife, who is called a keret habayit, the foundation and essential factor of a Jewish home, since the entire conduct of the home largely depends upon her, and it is her great responsibility as well as privilege to make the home a sanctuary and abode for God's presence. It is surely unnecessary to enlarge upon this to you with blessing. If anybody wants to have this letter, as I mentioned in the past, just email us, as I said, the form that I described, meaningfullife.com/mylife, and you'll find the form there that you can ask, but we must have your email address because it's all completely anonymous. Unless you give us your email address, I can't send you this letter. So please include your email address there and we will send you the letter, please God. Okay. So this speaks for itself, and as I said in episode 150, I discussed it at length, I believe very similar to what I've just said right now. Next question. How can I explain the value of Shabbos to my friend who unfortunately doesn't keep it? As the Rebbe would say, le'esata, up till now at least, and in a revealed fashion. So that's the question here. So let me read it more in detail. It's the same as that. I just did read the details. Sorry about that. Okay, very good question. As always, these things always have to be addressed case by case because people are different. We are not here to preach to anyone, and to just impose. It usually doesn't work. If you're able to do that because you're with a person who responds to that, that's one thing. Even then, you don't want to do it in a way that's negative and that won't last. You want something sustainable. So the answer to this is something we have consistently from the Rebbe about everything, not just about Shabbos, but about in general Torah, mitzvahs, and Yiddishkeit. The two things that are critical in these areas to have influence on someone is words from the heart enter the heart, and secondly, being a living example. So often people go with the approach of being judgmental, condescending, I'm holier than thou, look how negative, look how despicable you are, you're not keeping Shabbos, you're not doing this, and then we're doing that. Usually it does not work. I remember once in a Fabrengen in the Mems, in the 80s, where the Rebbe said, "Stell sich vor." Imagine, you meet somebody in the street, a campaign, Mivtzoin, and you start talking to them about, let's say, Shabbos or something else, and the way you do it is you say, if you don't keep Shabbos, if you don't put on tefillin, you won't do this or you won't do that, you'll burn in Gehenna, and you'll be punished in this way or in that way. You go on speaking about all the negative things that can happen as a result. Imagine the impact that has on someone. By contrast, let's take another approach. Talk to them about their neshama, of a beautiful neshama, and how that neshama is a chelik elikam emal mamash, a divine piece of the divine. It came down to this world to transform this world. And wouldn't it be beautiful for you to be able to shine and express your potential and actualize your potential and actualize yourself through Shabbos or through kashrus or through tefillin? And the Rebbe says, as cooked alain, the Even HaBeichen, that the litmus test will be the effect on a person. It's quite obvious. I once heard a story. This was a Eid from Yerushalayim, came to see the Rebbe in the early years, 1955 maybe. And he was from Eid from Yerushalayim. He asked the Rebbe a question. How should he deal with the fact there are Jews, unfortunately, that drive on Shabbos in Yerushalayim? What should be his approach to it? Should he ignore it? Should he yell at them? What should be his approach? So the Rebbe said, this is the way I heard the story, that he once asked the same question to the Frierdiker Rebbe, that when they lived in Leningrad, Frierdiker Rebbe moved to Leningrad in Tovresh Pei Dalet, I believe, Pei Gimel, Pei Dalet, from Rostov, which would be 1923, 1924. And the Rebbe was there. That's when the Rebbe came to the Frierdiker Rebbe the first time. The first time he heard the Maimer, it wasn't Basi L'Gani then, it was called Be'etzem Hayem Hazeh. But that was when the Frierdiker Rebbe first heard those Maimarim. Some say this Basi L'Gani was the first Maimer that he heard. Al Kaponim, they would go Fabring by the Frierdiker Rebbe in his apartment, in his place. And then it was a very Jewish area. And you'd walk, there were many Jews on Shabbos who were doing things that were not Shabbosdik. So the Rebbe told this fellow, I asked my shver, what should be the attitude when you see someone, let's say, smoking on Shabbos? Rahman al-Islam. So the Frierdiker Rebbe looked at him and said, if you see someone doing something on Shabbos that's not appropriate, go over to him and give him a smile and a warm way, give him a loud and hearty, good Shabbos, a good Shabbos Eich. In other words, awaken the neshama in them to want to understand, to appreciate Shabbos. When it comes to words from the heart, the same approach, which is that we speak from the heart, we speak with care. It's not about an agenda, I'm going to try to convince you to keep Shabbos. Whatever the reason this person is not doing it, either because of ignorance or because they once did keep it and now they, for some reason, have wandered away from it, the key is always to show it with beauty. You know, you invite someone to a Shabbos table and you demonstrate how beautiful the table is with family, the songs sung, the conversations. Who's not going to want to have more of that? If, however, they see negativity associated with it, they won't want to associate with it. So the key thing is to be a living example and talk in that fashion. Will you always have the direct impact immediately? As I said, I don't know this individual, so I can't speak more details. But every person has their soft spots and every person has a way to reach. But it has to be authentic and have to be caring. And if you really demonstrate through example and through words the beauty of Shabbos, it becomes a way irresistible. That's what we have to be doing. And the same thing with other matters of Yiddishkeit. If you send me more details about this individual that you think that I can address more detail, I'd be happy to do so. But with little what you've said, this would be the general response that I would give. Okay, next question. Is the Rebbe perfect? Okay. Rabbi Jacobson, I have many questions to ask you. However, I don't want to bombard you with all the questions at once. And secondly, I need time to digest the answers. Hence, I will start with a question which I asked you by the end of the Fabrengen on Sunday. It was a Fabrengen I gave in New York. That's what he's referring to. However, I didn't feel that I got a good answer Probably because it was already 3:30 a.m. Maybe, maybe not. The question is that if the Rebbe is not an entity for himself, for itself, rather is just a manifestation of godliness, then how could it be that the Rebbe did show signs of mortality? For instance, many times the Rebbe showed emotions, which by definition means mitzias. The Rebbe wrote a will. We even find that the Rebbe Rashab visited Freud for depression. How could that be if a Rebbe is elikus? Then why is he going to get help by therapists? I thought all the answers are in Tanya. Then some mashpiyim say that just like by Hashem there is das tachten, which is the perspective from below, they say the same as by the Rebbe, but I don't know what that means. If I want to say that by God there's also the concept of so-called mitzias and feelings, so then the question is also on God. I hope you understand what I'm asking. I would prefer to get an answer through an email with Mara Mekemes than you answering on your class online. Thank you. P.S. The Rebbe mentions in the Hanocha Bilti Mug of Pinchas Mem Hey that I'm a boss of Adam, which means flesh and blood, and that I make mistakes. And the Rebbe also mentions that I haven't reached the completion of Moyach Shal Talalev. I thought the Rebbe is supposed to be perfect. Isn't Hashem perfect? By the way, there are many points in the question I asked. You firstly, could a Rebbe make mistakes? Secondly, could a Rebbe have feelings? If feelings means mitzias. 3, how could the Rebbe Rashab go to Freud for depression? How to explain all the expressions that we use for Hashem that he loves and is angry? Okay. So firstly, some of these questions, directly or indirectly, I've already addressed. And I'll just give you a list of a bunch of previous episodes. This is obviously a big theme, the Rebbe. Especially episode 121. But I will also mention 20 through 23, 41, 52, 87, 88, 93, 96, 101, 107, 112, 114, 116, 157, 170, and 172. If you didn't get that, you could always rewind and hear this again. You don't rewind, but just go back in my discussion here, and you can hear the numbers. So, let me say the following. Firstly, we know that a Rebbe is a boss of Adam, yes, he comes on a Neshama Beguf, and as such, whether it's Avram, Yitzchak, Yankiv, who are complete merkavas, it says in Tanya, 24/7, or Moshe Rabbeinu, and all the tzaddikim through all the generations, the same question can be asked. Are they perfect? Can they make a mistake? Do they have feelings? It's an excellent question, and this is not a matter of avoiding such a question. We know that on one hand they were completely dedicated, and I'll talk about the Ovis now, Moshe Rabbeinu, and then I'll go back to the Rebbe, because it's the same idea. Completely dedicated, they were Merkava. Merkava means a chariot, complete channel, transparent channel of divine will on this earth. And yet we find expressions of a chet, that they maybe did a sin. So the Rebbe explains, Chassidus explains, chet melosh chsad, which means there's a sin, an overt sin, which Chaz v'Shalom they did not do, but they're capable of not completely doing what they should be doing. For example, when Avram came down to Mitzrayim with Sarah, and the first time he looks at him, he says, "You're beautiful." When he didn't notice till now, she was beautiful. But he suddenly saw it because he came to Eretz Haaretz, to the depraved land of Egypt, and he suddenly saw it a little from their eyes, not quite like they saw it, but he saw how they could see that beauty in a very hedonistic way. This is not a matter of a chsad in the sense of something wrong. It's just that now he came to a place that he's able to see it through those eyes. The mere fact that we have a tzaddik, we mean that somebody's coming to this world, looks at things through the eyes of this world. But as he says in Tanya, tzaddik gomor, even a tzaddik she'ena gomor, is someone that's completely dedicated to the divine to the point that he has no yetzer hara. But nevertheless, because we live in Golus, everyone, ain't tzaddik be'oretz, there's no tzaddik on earth that has not some type of chsad. Why? Either because of his own avodah, what he could have achieved. For example, you say about Moshe Rabbeinu that 49 gates of Bina. That's the expression. He does good and does not have any yechta. But the yechta there doesn't mean sin. The yechta could be in lashon chsad, not as complete, like I say, Moshe Rabbeinu. He achieved 49 gates. There's 50 gates of Bina. He reached 49. When did he reach the 50th? When he went on Har Nevoi, as the Magid, the Mesiritcha Magid teaches, Nevoi, the mountain Nevoi is Nun Boi. That's when he reached the 50th. And when you have 49, Chassidus says it's chayla. Chayla is the gematria, illness, sickness, being sick is the gematria of 49. But obviously, Moshe's chayla was not the chayla of a sick person, God forbid. By him, lefiyerech, relative to his state, not having that 50th gate, not having Mashiach, not having the Geula. The Talmidim of the Arizal asked the question, and they wondered, what about the Arizal? Why did the Arizal say Al Chet on Yom Kippur? Al Chet is something where you talk about sins, real sins that are some of them are extremely coarse sins. How the Arizal was a tzaddik, not shayachted. So the explanation given, two explanations. Number one, he said it because of the generation. Since he's a leader of a generation, so in a way, he has responsibility for the generation. Number two, he himself, because of that, also has bedakus, in a subtle way, part of what the generation deals with, like the famous story with the Mittler Rebbe, that he had to find bedakus, subtly, the issue with someone else, and within himself, corrected, then he could advise. Obviously, it's extremely subtle and not quite blown up and amplified as it is in regular people's lives. But even a person like that, because he's a tzaddik, like Moshe Rabbeinu ends up staying in the Midbar. Why didn't he go into Eretz Yisrael? So they say because he hit the stone instead of speaking to the stone. And that too, if you think about it, speaking to a stone and hitting a stone, both equally are miracles to get water out of a stone. But since it could be interpreted, the level of Moshe, that he made one shift from the Eibishter's words, that was already chassadim for him. So it's a thing of relative. To put it in another aces, I'll use the expression, the story of the Rabbi Hillel Parich. Once was after the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbe and Chaim was nostalgic in Tofresh Chof Aleph, 5 years before the Tzemach Tzedek Histalkus. So Tzemach Tzedek went into a type of seclusion. I don't know what word to use, but didn't say Maimorim, was not taking Yechidus, was not answering questions. Chassidim had a lot of aggravation over it, obviously, and they tried to convince that Tzemach Tzedek said, Ein melech b'nei matronisa, there's no king without a queen. They tried to say, well, through Torah. Bottom line is, it was a difficult time. Then news came that the Tzemach Tzedek is going to say Mayim Chassidus, which was unbelievable simcha. The Chassidim gathered, Lubavitch. Rabbi Hillel Parich, who was already not a young man himself, he would pass away Yud Aleph of Tafresh Chav Daled, came from Parich for this Maimer. By him, especially by Rabbi Hillel, a Maimer was Dover Yoker, was extremely precious. Okay, they're waiting, Tzemach Tzedek, half hour, an hour. Rabbi Hillel was not young, he was not well, so he had to go out, he couldn't stay there anymore. As he's walking out, he hears two young people saying something that was not appropriate to say on the Rebbe. They were saying, "Nu was kementan." The Rebbe is in a state of whatever words they used. He was so disturbed by what they said, he went over to them and said to them, "Shvenzelach, shvenzelach, shvenzelach." I'll let you interpret what that means yourselves. It means fools, fools, or idiots, idiots, idiots. What do you think? Was meint it? As a Rebbe is eigen anoz mit amoil. A Rebbe is a lakus. B'shas edo ahelam af a lakus, edo ahelam af a Rebbe. What do you think? The Rebbe is eyes, nose, and a mouth. A Rebbe is a lakus, a channel for divine expression. And when there's a concealment on a lakus, on godliness, there's a concealment on the Rebbe. That's how you have to look at this. So is there possible, yes, that a Rebbe could have a lapse? Obviously, we find the Salma Halacha from Moshe Rabbeinu, but it's not to be compared any way like by us. It's Lefi Erech, subtly, and also because the Rebbe also carries the responsibility of the generation and has subtly everything we have. So you can say there's that element. The Rebbe could have a toothache. As we know, the Rebbe Rashab had a lot of pain in his teeth. He could have a sciatica. He could have issues, but not issues that we can even compare. Bedakus, like the Shara Nun, the 50th gate that's missing. We even say the Eibush, the Shchinte begalusa. The Shchina is in Galus. And we say Kaloni Mireshi, that when a person does something down below, even the Eibush says, I'm weakened in my head. What means God's head? Doesn't mean physically, it's metaphorical. The way the Adam Elyon, the divine, manifests, Nishtalshlus, you can say, Koshik Kriyas Yamsa, for example. It's as difficult as parting the sea in this week's Pash. For God, it's difficult. But God bound himself, like you mentioned, Das Tachten, he bound himself to existence, and therefore, of course, there's no pain in God, there's no feelings, and there's no mortality. But due to the fact that he bound himself, there can be an effect on that level. And the same thing with the tzaddik. The effect is not in a grobe weg. It's in a subtle way, and it's in order for him to help repair, like I said, with the 50th gate. So the bottom line is, a Rebbe, there can be a concealment. There could be a concealment, and that concealment you would call perhaps an imperfection. But it's very different than imperfection, where it's not a concealment over the divine. It's imperfection simply because we are not perfect human beings. That's how I would explain this this explanation. And yeah, I'm sure there's more to talk about, but I want to move on to the next question, which comes right after this. What's your take on the video clip going around from the HASC concert of Avram Fried singing Baruch Haba Melech HaMashiach and videos of the Rebbe screening in the background? My brother, a devout anti, thinks it's sickening and major chilul Chabad. I personally think it's a major sign from Hashem that Higia Zman Gulasam, that the Geula has arrived. Well, regarding this whole issue, Rebbe Mashiach, firstly I spoke about this in episodes 47, 48. Regarding context here, look, I don't have really a strong opinion of the matter. I wasn't involved in the production of the HASC concert. It's interesting that they would play videos as he's singing the song. And to me, it comes down to it's a Kiddush Hashem to have a beautiful song sung, the Rebbe's face that people see, and they let everybody interpret it as they see fit. I don't think we have to go into any political interpretations for or against or so on. Again, I don't know the history behind it, but hey, Mashiach we all are hoping for. We all want to follow the Rebbe's guidelines. We all know the different approaches to this topic, and we know that it can be embroiled in all kinds of negative stuff. I would like to take the high road and simply say, beautiful, it was played. I mean, I didn't hear any controversy out there. If anybody has their issues, their own personal issues, and I think we just should accept it what it is. And as I said, the argument can be made, if they're planning to do it, should we do it? So we have the discussions on this a number of times here. If it's something that is going to some way create controversy or create sensationalism or some way cause someone not to want to learn Chassidus, we have the directives from the Rebbe. To go force these things down people's throats is not the approach. As far as this goes, I don't know what the intention was. You know, I did see it, and it seemed very nice and sweet, and that's it. I don't think we have to go further than that. Okay. Let us now go to a few follow-ups, or one follow-up actually. Then we will go to suggestions that were sent to me, and we will do the Chassidus, something about davening and the Chassidus question. Hope for time allows. Okay. Here we are. This is a follow-up about Chassidim and Misnagdim that I spoke about last week's episode 197. And here's the question. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, thank you for your weekly episodes, which offer a wonderful and practical way to apply Chassidus into our daily life. While I glean much inspiration from your episodes, there is one topic discussed now for a second time in episode 197, which I wonder if your approach is proper. There seems to be a justification for making jokes about Misnagdim, so long as it is not about an individual. In addition, you explained that it is an archetype and that we're referring to the Misnagdim inside of each one of us. This attitude is questionable to me, and forgive me if I misunderstood or misrepresent your words. Firstly, I'm not familiar with the Rebbe belittling Misnagdim in the spirit, and I'm not convinced that what some Chassidim do is an appropriate approach for all. My greater concern is that it can give off a false sense of righteousness. One can convince themselves that they are automatically holier or closer to Hashem because they were born into a Chassidish home and go to a Chassidish yeshiva. One may also view all Litvisha as Misnagdim without distinguishing between those who oppose Shittas Chassidus and those who simply learned in another yeshiva but are open to Torah approaches of all from denominations, including Chassidus Chabad. I am in an out-of-town community where there is more crossover and mingling between the different from denominations. Occasionally you hear Misnagdim used in a derogatory way, referring to those raised outside a Chassidish circle. You may end up with a chassid who gets up late, rushes through davening without a minyan, spends minimal time learning, perhaps reads Chitas and Rambam, one who isn't that careful of the way others are spoken about, or it can be a girl or woman who's questionably dressed, halachically tznius, etc. Yet is comfortable looking down at others who are careful in all the above. Some may not be makpid on chol v'Yisrael or shaving beards because of their mesorah. They are ever diligent in learning and davening, yet they are seen as inferior and written off as a misnagid. On a related note, there's a Lag Ba'omer Sikha, where it explains that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva had Ahavas Yisrael, but lacked in respecting any other approach in Avodas Hashem. Would this apply to respecting those from other frum segments who weren't exposed to Chassidus? This may include those who may be referred to as Misnagdim by some. We have so much to offer without putting down others, and I wonder why some still feel the need for this. Personally, I would abolish this conduct and focus on advantages and responsibilities from the Rebbe and Chassidus that we must earn through Avodah. Thank you again for your dedication to spreading relatable Chassidus to so many of us. P.S. I am familiar with a reference in a Sikha about Balabata She'idin. For example, ask 3 and do the opposite, but not the term Misnagid. During dollars and many other occasions, we see the Rebbe encouraged Yidden from all backgrounds to increase in their publishing of Chidushei Torah or growing their Mosid. This may be an overlooked lesson we can learn from the Rebbe. Okay, I don't have much to add to what I said, and I just repeat again, this idea of dismissing anybody, whether with a derogatory term or with misnagid or whatever it is, we know is not the approach, and I made that very, very clear. I was talking about stories you hear from Chassidus She'id, stories you may see in different sikhs, where there's a dismissal of a misnagdish approach to something. It could be the misnagdim of back then. But I was saying, what is the lesson? Because we all have the archetype of something of that nature. But make it very clear, unequivocally, we're not talking about in any way to be derogatory about anybody. Who are we to judge? Who are we to know? Exactly like you say, we don't know who's frum, we don't know who's chassidish, we don't know anything. We know what we have to try to do ourselves, and our approach to others has to be always with Ahavas Yisrael. So I reiterate again, yes, people stoop sometimes to approaches that are actually quite not appropriate for a chassid to behave. I'm not justifying that. I'm not in any way justifying. I was speaking strictly about situations where you may find something from the Rabbeim or from Chassidim, Chassidus She'idin, and that's how I was explaining what it means, the archetype, so to speak, as opposed to the individual. Beyond that, I totally agree with the idea the approach has to be always a positive one, and we are not here to look at others, down at others. We have to look at ourselves and not judge in any way other people. Okay. In the suggestion box, since there have been suggestions coming in, let me read one more suggestion this week. Rabbi Jacobson, over the course of presenting all your episodes of Chassidus Applied, you have shared with us the Rebbe's approach to a wide variety of problems that challenge many of us. It would be great if you could organize and condense all your responses into a Shilas and Shuvas Sefer, questions and answers book. It would surely take up a few volumes. This Sefer could be a survival guide for us in this bitter galus until Mashiach comes. May it be very soon in our days. Hatzlacha. So thank you for the suggestions. Come from many different places, and I think it's a great idea. You know, like everything, you have to find priorities and find time. But if anybody's interested in helping doing this, anyone interested in helping sponsor doing something like this, please be in touch with us or me easily. You can call or email me at simon@meaningfullife.com, and I would call you back and we can talk about it. So I think it's a great idea and definitely part of the step and process of presenting Chassidus in an applied way, in a practical way. Okay, there's more to come. I will do the prayer next week. Bli neder, I keep pushing it off, I know, but that's life. And what I'm going to address now is the next part 4 on the Chassidus question of this week. Chassidus question about free will. Yeah. So last week I promised that I would look over the Shara Bechira that someone wrote about, and I actually did. So I want to say firstly that anyone listening to this is a part 4 of a discussion on free will and what does free will mean and how does it reconcile with other elements in divine providence and so on. So you can listen to the previous episodes. They're all available, basically episodes 195, 196, 197, and now we're talking about it 198. I also discussed it at length in 124 and 125. So someone wrote about something from the Mitler Rebbe, Shara Bechira, which is in Shari Tshuva, and I want to explain what it says there. He asks a question, the Mitler Rebbe, that we see, even though we talk about free will as being such a fundamental principle, but nevertheless it seems that there's a contradiction. Because we see that yes, there are things that we have power to do through our acts, but there are times we learn that in Hatshuva, for example, is not dependent on Bechira, but it's dependent on an awakening from above that awakens someone below to do tshuva. Like we know from the Maimer Chazal that says that there's a hachraza, there's an announcement that comes from heaven to do tshuva. So it gives us strength to do tshuva. And he brings a whole bunch of proofs that seemingly from above, God helps us be the right way. And sometimes from above can also lead you to tests and wander from the right path. So how is that consistent? He explains with, he says, sometimes pushes him to do something that's not positive, or pushes him to do something that's positive. So he asked the question, how does that reconcile with free will? He says it's true there are things that are dependent on the human being, but there are clearly things that are dependent from above. So the Mittler Rebbe answers, you have to say that Bechira is in every area. Even the things that come from a Maila, it's only because a person already began going in that direction. So like you say, Habola Tayr, Messiah Nese. Someone comes to be purified, so from above they'll give him strength. If someone comes and starts going the opposite direction of purity, from heaven too, they will also direct them in that direction. But it all begins with what he calls, the person mentioned last week, Nukudas Hadas, no, Nukudas Harotzen. It all begins with the Nukudas Harotzen, I would call the kernel, the spark of where your inclinations are. Im l'tayr or l'tameh. If your inclination is to go toward the pure, so then from above they'll give you that strength. So it's still dependent on your free will. So all these places where it says from above, that's responding to our personal inclination and choice. And from above you don't have an inclination, amshach would be a type of transmission, directing you to one way or director. It's only l'siyua l'chizuk harbi yeser. It's only to support and give you great strength. Like we say, aveda gereres aveda, for example. When a person sins, it leads to another sin, God forbid. Mitzvah gereres mitzvah. A person does a mitzvah, it leads to another mitzvah. So what does that mean? That from above they're making the choice? No. Your behavior is causing you're drawing upon yourself more negative energy that can lead you to more negative things, as we see. So it starts with your will, not from above. That's the general gist of the explanation. But in addition to that, we've been getting some more, I received a bunch of other comments. I'll read one. And let me see if I have more beyond this. Yeah. Hello, I'm a bocher in Holatere Zal, Shir Dalet. I had this question for quite a while about free will. I first thought of it a while learning Tanya, that one is to be melamed schus on a fellow, means to look at and find merit on a fellow, that the reason he sins is because he's in the position he is in. And if I was in the same position, I wouldn't be any better. Talks there about people in business or at work. Right. So we're supposed to always be melamed schus. This made me think, if so, then what is free will? Now, obviously, the point of the Tanya is to say that you can't judge anyone. Exactly. And not to say that your surroundings control you, rather that it does indeed have a great impact on you, and maybe if I was in that position, I would have been worse than the other. Correct. So the Tanya is not talking about free will. The free will is still there. But for you to judge somebody else who's in a position where they may have an assignment, a test, that's not your job. That person obviously has to not allow the environment to control them, as we said before. It's all up to you. You make the decision what your environment, how you'll behave. But the fellow continues, the question is like this. Seemingly someone who grew up in a loving home and caring home, and he was educated well and has a straight mind and never met certain circumstances and has good genes. It seems possible to predict his life. This may sound absurd, but maybe it's almost impossible to take into account every single thing. Imagine two people that have gone through the same exact life and will continue to go through the same circumstances. Will they not choose the same? It's hard to say that they won't because it's hard to imagine. I hope my question is understood, despite my whole English. Well, your question is clear, but let me pick it this way, as the Rambam says. Whether we will be born tall or short, meaning whether we'll grow into a tall person or short person, wealthy or poor, or other factors, blue eyes or brown eyes, is not up to us. How we will use it is absolutely up to us. And it's incorrect to say there are people born in wealth, and you think they have all the privileges. What excuse do they have not to be good people? And yet you see some are and some are not. There are people born in poverty, broken, demoralized, and yet some people, and which gives them an excuse, you could say, to not accomplish, and some people turn out refined, beautifully refined human beings, and some don't. So the circumstances do not define you. Do they make it easier or harder? Everything has its sign. It's true. Growing up in a healthy home, a loving home, and all the circumstances you described, of course, makes it more conducive. But when it comes to free will, we're not talking about conducive to be a healthy person, conducive to doing the right thing. People have temptations. Growing up in a healthy home, not a healthy home. Even if it does create more nisyanis and more challenges, every situation has its challenges. So this does not negate free will. It simply says that circumstances, everyone has their circumstance. Like I said, which is worse, poor or rich, as far as challenges comes to the Yetzer Hara? It depends. They both have their challenge. The same thing with other circumstances. Now, you could say a person growing up, say, in a very unhealthy home, a person who's been abused, God forbid, is it more likely that they could get themselves into trouble? Yes. But the free will is never taken away. They can also get help, and they can solve their problems. Is it more uphill and more challenging? We can't judge them, as we said from Tanya. Yes, they have many challenges, but you cannot say that they don't have free will. Free will is never taken away from a human being. And free will may include going to the right type of people that help, and so on. That's one more about Bechira. Hi, I'd like to follow up on the topic of Bechira that was discussed in video 186. I have not yet had a chance to listen to the most recent recording, so if what I ask is followed up, you can assume I will be answered there. You can assume I will be answered. The concept is one that I've wondered about for a long time, and I wanted to follow up on the question of what causes us to choose the mind's suggestion over the heart, good over not. As you said, we all have our predispositions, etc., and we are given the power to overcome them and choose. However, what is it that is making that choice? You referenced that you had previously discussed this or a similar detail. Where can I find this? Absolutely, this was discussed, and interestingly, I wrote down for myself where. I will have to respond next week because I don't have it in front of me, and I don't want to start looking for it right now. Yes, discussed. This was the topic discussed about what the Tzemach Tzedek writes in the beginning of chapter 10 of Tanya. Mihu ha'ish, mihu ha'beicher. When you say a person chooses between the Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara, Nefesh L'kis, Nefesh Abamis, who's the one that chooses? And he refers later to a chapter later in Tanya that talks about that for a tzaddik is the Nefesh L'kis that chooses, and for a Rasha, for Tevle is the Nefesh Abamis that chooses. So this isn't really, well, in some places it says, Chassidus is the Nefesh HaSichlis, the third Nefesh, not referred to or only hinted to in Tanya, the Nefesh HaSichlis, which is a neutral arbiter between the two. But let me get back to you again. I apologize. I thought I had it written down, but that's part of life, and I didn't. So I'll write this down next time, and I'll follow up and give you this detail in episode 199. So let us conclude now. We're not going to do essays because we finished the essays actually of last year, and the essays of the new contest are still being written, with the deadline being Rosh Chodesh Adar. So please write your essays. So we will not be doing essays the next few weeks. So that feature is right now on hold until the next batch of essays are delivered. And I want to wish everybody a very Freilich and Yud Shevat, Freilich and Chodesh Shevat in general, and it should be used out this day properly in the fullest fashion, the keiches we get from the Rebbe, from the Frierdiker Rebbe, on this special day. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 198. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. And please continue to send in your questions, your comments, your feedback. Everyone have a very blessed week and a very freiliche week. Thank you so much.